Hey everyone, welcome back to 1:35 a.m. I'm finally getting to continue it. I've been waiting for so long because, Amazon wasn't deciding to give me my book. I know you have the book, Amazon. Give me the book. um, but yeah, I still don't have it. I just kind of got fed up, and so I got the ebook totally legally. And today we're going to continue it before someone else does and, takes all my viewers. Maybe don't go to someone else if they do an audiobook like this. Okay, I'm just gonna read it. Okay, I'm just gonna read it. Delilah woke up at 10:10 the next morning, and the first thing she did when she got up, besides covering her ears so she couldn't hear Mary singing about dusting books, was call Harper and ask her to come by. She woke Harper up, but Harper never let stuff like that bother her. "Sure, I'll be there in a bit," she chirped. When Harper arrived, she dropped her sack-style leather purse on the floor, flopped onto the love seat, and said, "What's the problem?" "How do you know there's a problem?" Delilah sat down next to her. "You don't normally ask me to come over." "Oh yeah." Delilah had basically summoned her friend. That showed how rattled she was. "I have a question," Delilah said. "Must be a good one." "Did you rescue Ella from the dumpster yesterday?" "What?" Mary sang out, "Because I feel fizzy." Harper grinned. She liked Mary's songs. "The doll, Ella. Did you get her out of the dumpster?" Harper ruffled her eyebrows. "Why would I do that?" "You said she could be worth something." "Well, she could, but she's your doll, not mine. If I was going to look for her, I'd tell you." Delilah rubbed her face with her hands. "Yeah, she should have known that." "Why are you asking? Did you look and not find her?" "Yeah, I looked, sort of. I didn't dig through the trash, but then the dumpsters were emptied." "Okay, so Ella is gone. What's the big?" Delilah hadn't told Harper about being wakened at 1:35 a.m. every morning. She just told her about finding the doll and throwing it out when it didn't work. She couldn't think of a way to tell Harper about waking up at the same time 4 nights in a row without sounding like she was overreacting. Besides, Harper would just talk about signs again if Delilah told her. "Since I'm here, you want to go out and get some lunch?" Harper asked. Delilah waved goodbye to Harper with relief. She was glad the lunch was over, because in the middle of it she'd come up with an idea. Now she could finally act on it. Pointing her car in the direction of the newer neighborhood with the runty cherry trees, she went in search of the house where she'd found the garage sale, and Ella. She planned to get some answers about the doll from the doll's previous owner. Without signs to direct her, Delilah missed a turn and had to backtrack. Eventually, though, she'd pulled up in front of the Spanish-style house where she'd met Mumford, the friendly Chihuahua. But Mumford wasn't home. Nobody was. Even though Delilah could see from the street that the bare windows revealed vacant rooms in the house, she pulled into the empty driveway and got out of her car. Inhaling the still, humid air, she wrinkled her nose at a smell that reminded her of rotting leaves. The neighborhood was unusually silent. The only thing she heard was a lone dog barking in the distance. This was the house, wasn't it? She studied it, then turned and looked at the surrounding houses. Yes, this was it. "Weird," she said aloud. But was it? After all, the woman who lived here had been having her garage sale. People did that before they moved, right? Delilah couldn't read anything into the fact that there was no trace of anyone or anything in this place where she'd found Ella. So, why did it feel ominous? Hoping she might stumble over some clue to where Mumford and the woman with the spiky hair might have gone, Delilah circled the house and peeked in windows. She found nothing. The house was completely empty but for a single wadded-up paper towel on the counter in the kitchen. All Delilah got from her exploration was a creepy coil of unease that wrapped itself around her chest and didn't leave, even after she practically ran for her car and drove away as fast as she could. Back in her apartment, Delilah ate enough cookies and milk to dissipate the disquiet she'd taken away from the empty house. "Okay," she said. "Plan B." Setting up her laptop in her bed, Delilah got comfy. She checked her watch. She had about 45 minutes before she had to go to work. Plenty of time, she hoped. Next door, Mary was singing about mushrooms, but Delilah didn't care. She was on a mission. She figured she could find information about Ella on the internet. She started her web search with Ella doll, but she was afraid that would be too general. But one of the millions of results gave her some information. Production of the Ella doll, Delilah discovered, was discontinued for undisclosed reasons. Jumping off from that fact, she tried to find out more about the doll, but she kept bumping into the same useless information, or the text of the instruction booklet she'd read. Running out of time, she began trying crazy searches. Haunted Ella doll, broken Ella doll, unique Ella doll, defective Ella doll, special Ella doll. These searches took her into a lot of pointless blogs that had nothing to do with the Ella doll. But one of the searches for special Ella doll led her to an online ad posted by a user named Phineas, who was trying to find one of the dolls. His ad referenced the special Ella doll and said he was willing to pay a premium for the doll's energy, whatever that meant. Delilah checked her watch. She had to get to work. So much for her clever ideas. All they'd done was put her more on edge than she already was. 3 more nights, 3 more 1:35 a.m. wakenings. One night, Delilah had awakened certain that she was being watched. Every hair on her body had bristled like little antennae, telling her she was under scrutiny. In her mind's eye, she saw Ella's huge dark eyes boring into her soul. When she lunged for her light, she thought something touched her arm, but the light revealed she was alone. The next night, Delilah heard a rustling sound so faint it shouldn't even have been noticeable, but it still jolted Delilah from sleep. When she opened her eyes, the sound got louder. It was coming from her closet, as if someone was rifling through her clothes. Fumbling for her light, Delilah got up, strode to her closet door, and flung it open. The closet contained nothing but her clothes and shoes. The next night, a rapping sound woke up Delilah. In her dream, the rapping came from a woodpecker. When she was awake, though, she realized the rapping was coming from the floor. Something was under the floorboards, tapping at the wood, as if trying to find a way out. Fighting hysteria, Delilah managed to get her light on. As soon as the room was lit up, the tapping stopped. Delilah was starting to get a little freaked out. She was so freaked out that she was now having trouble sleeping. After her shift, Delilah was so exhausted she'd fallen into the bed and go right back to sleep. But then something would wake her at 1:35 a.m. Some sound or sensation, something just beyond the periphery of Delilah's consciousness, would intrude into her sleep and drag her into wakefulness. Tonight, it was the sound of something in the wall between her apartment and Mary's. It was a scratching sound, wasn't it? Or was it a droning? Could it have been an alarm? No, Delilah didn't think so. She was pretty sure something was moving around in the wall. Delilah turned on the light and looked at her empty bedroom. She pulled her knees to her chest and tried to rein in her galloping heart. Here was the problem with all these nocturnal intrusions. They all sounded like something was trying to get to her. Something sneaking up on her or beckoning to her in some way. Delilah was sure it was Ella. The doll was still nearby. She had to be. And she was functional. She just wasn't functional in a helpful way. Delilah had given this a lot of thought. A ton of thought. It was basically all she'd thought about for days. She decided maybe Ella was not at all pleased about being tossed out. Maybe being discarded activated some subroutine that turned on new functions in Ella. Hidden functions. Maybe the person who made Ella had a sick sense of humor and thought it would be a fun trick to play on someone who had the audacity to throw his creation away. Or maybe Ella malfunctioned. Whatever. The bottom line was Ella was out to get Delilah. Delilah could think of no other explanation for what was happening. But what could she do about it? She stared at the thin barrier between her domain and Mary's. Mary. What if Mary had the doll? Mary's apartment looked out over the dumpsters, and she was home all day. What if she saw Delilah throw the doll away and she went out and got it? Delilah had to find out. Starting to get out of bed and go to knock on Mary's door, Delilah stopped. It was the middle of the night. Pounding on someone's door in the middle of the night was a good way to start a confrontation. She didn't want a confrontation. She didn't want Mary to get defensive and hide Ella. No, she'd have to wait until morning and try to get Mary to give up Ella by playing nice. Mary was singing about penguins when Delilah got out of the shower at 7:30 a.m. Dressing in her exercise clothes because she figured she'd need to run after speaking to Mary, Delilah went into the kitchen and warmed up the slice of peach pie she brought back from the diner the night before. She didn't know much about Mary, but she did know Mary liked pie, especially peach pie. Delilah left her apartment when Mary shifted into a verse about polar bears. As she knocked on Mary's flimsy front door, Mary belted out a line about an iceberg and then went silent. A second later, the door opened. "Miss Delilah! What a nice surprise!" Mary grinned, and reached out to grab Delilah. Delilah barely had time to move the pie to the side before Mary's big arms pulled her into a tight hug. Delilah's nose got buried in Mary's substantial shoulder. Mary smelled like sausages and sweat and lavender. "Hi, Mary," Delilah said when Mary released her. She followed Mary into the peaceful, Japan-inspired oasis that was Mary's apartment. The first time Delilah had knocked on Mary's door to talk to her about the singing, Delilah had been expecting to find a cluttered apartment filled with knickknacks and books. Mary just looked like that kind of woman. About 5'8" of well-padded, middle-aged frump. Mary had permed gray hair, a lined face, and round tortoise-shell glasses perched on a slightly upturned nose. She wore clothes in layers. Vests over shirts over skirts over dresses, usually in a mismatched color hodgepodge. But Mary's apartment looked nothing like Mary. "Please take off your shoes," Mary sang when Delilah forgot. "Oh, right, sorry." Delilah held the pie in one hand while she balanced on one foot and then the other to pull off her running shoes. She placed the shoes in the little rack just inside the door. Then she bowed to Mary when Mary bowed to her. "I brought you peach pie," Delilah held out the warm pie container. "Oh, that's just the thing." Mary grabbed the container, bowed to Delilah again, and glided into her pristine kitchen to get chopsticks. Delilah didn't know if Mary's decor and lifestyle came from a history with Japanese culture, or whether Mary just fancied herself Japanese. She never asked because it felt rude to say. "What's with the Japanese stuff?" But Delilah had read enough to know that she was standing on a tatami mat, and that a bamboo screen hid the bedroom door, and that she was being ushered to a blue and gray zabatons set up around a chabudai on the far side of the living room. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. A gnarled bonsai in a blue container sat on the chabudai. Other than the mat, the table, and the Japanese pillows, the living room was bare. As Delilah sat on the gray cushions, she began questioning her idea that Mary had taken the doll. What would this strange woman want with the doll? It definitely didn't seem to suit her interior decor. But then, Delilah had never seen Mary's bedroom. What if that door hid a collection of dolls in frilly dresses? Mary placed a tea set on the chabudai, along with a plate of almond cookies, the pie container, and chopsticks. Having gone through the ritual before, Delilah let Mary pour the tea and offer her a cookie before she said anything. As Mary deftly swooped up a peach slice with her chopsticks, Delilah said, "I went to a cool garage sale the other day." Mary placed the peach slice in her mouth, closed her eyes, and chewed with what looked like sheer joy. When she finished chewing, she leaned toward Delilah and waved a chopstick in front of Delilah's face. "Second-hand stuff brings second-hand energy. Old hands. Bad hands. Tainted with story," Mary sang. She waved her chopsticks back and forth like a metronome, keeping time with the song's beat. "You don't like second-hand things?" Mary set down her chopsticks, grabbed the collar of her yellow blouse with both hands, and pulled the collar from her skin to shake it several times. She sang, "Penguins, penguins, pull in the cold. Polar bears scare away the old." Delilah frowned. She thought she'd figured out the second-hand thing, but this new verse baffled her. Mary let go of her collar and picked up her chopsticks again. Hot flashes. She broke off a piece of crust and tweezed it between her chopsticks. Delilah sipped tea and asked herself what she was doing here. How was she going to get an answer out of Mary? She'd be better off knocking out the woman and searching her apartment. Delilah watched Mary eat. Even if she was capable of knocking someone out, which she wasn't, Delilah didn't think it would be a good idea to take on Mary. Mary was not only taller and bigger, she probably knew some kind of martial arts or something. "The past leaves stains," Mary said. "What?" "No garage sales, no antique shops, no thrift stores. I don't want to open doors," Mary intoned. Delilah nodded. She was pretty sure she got that. If Mary didn't like old stuff because she thought old stuff had stains of the past, she wasn't likely to have pulled an old doll from a dumpster. Not unless she had done it now, and she was just messing with Delilah. Delilah stared into Mary's eyes. Mary stopped eating pie and stared right back. Her eyes were pale green, streaked with swirls of yellow. Kinda freaky. Delilah blinked and looked away. She stood. "I need to go for a run," Delilah said. "I need to finish my pie," Mary said. "Okay. I'm sorry, but I have to go." No sorry, no sorry, no sorry. Just be, Mary sang. "Okay. Bye, Mary." Of course, Mary's farewell was more singing. "Bye-bye, so long. Ta-ta, toodaloo, until later, alligator." Delilah waved at Mary and fled the woman's apartment. On the 10th night of chilling 1:35 a.m. wakenings, Delilah knocked her lamp onto the floor in a pure panic to turn it on. Instead, she'd broken it, and she was whimpering in fear by the time she got her flashlight from the nightstand drawer and flipped its switch. She was so sure the flashlight was going to reveal Ella at the side of her bed that she screamed as the light brightened the room. But nothing was there. Delilah, icy tendrils skirting her all over her body, shot the flashlight beam all over the room. The light quivered as it scanned the darkness because Delilah's hand was shaking. With every new shift in the flashlight's direction, she absolutely expected the light to reveal Ella's face emerging out of the dim. Where had the doll gone? Ella had been there, Delilah was sure of it. What else could have made those soft little footfalls that snatched Delilah from her sleep? Delilah had been dreaming she was lying in a hammock, alone. Then she'd heard footsteps, small and light, pattering closer and closer. She'd awakened when they reached her. Delilah kept shifting her flashlight's beam, and she listened. There, the soft steps. She aimed her light at her bedroom door. It was open. Had she left it open? She couldn't remember. She thought she'd closed it, but she couldn't be sure. She leaned toward the door and cocked her head, willing her ears to tell her what she was hearing. Were those footsteps in the living room? She heard a click. Was that her front door? Wanting to go look, while also not wanting to go look, Delilah chose to give in to inertia. She stayed right where she was, clutching her flashlight with one hand and grasping her sheets close to her body with the other. Still listening with every ounce of her being, she thought she heard a sound out in the hallway. Was that Mary's door opening and closing? Delilah hesitated for a few more seconds. Then she jumped out of bed, ran to the wall, and turned on the light. She looked around her bedroom. Everything was normal. She turned, opened her bedroom door the rest of the way, and ran into the living room to turn on the light. Again, everything looked as it should have. Her apartment door was closed and bolted. She was alone. That was the problem, wasn't it? Delilah crossed to her love seat and pulled Harper's afghan around her shoulders. She sat sideways with her legs tucked under her. By the time Delilah had met Harper, she'd resigned to herself to being alone. Sure, she was surrounded by foster kids, but they weren't family, and they weren't friends either. Until Harper. None of them loved her, and she didn't love them. None of her foster parents had loved her either. No one had loved Delilah until Harper came along, and even then, Harper couldn't love her enough. After her parents died, Delilah didn't think she'd ever again be loved the way her parents had loved her. Until she met Richard at a Halloween party. She was a senior in high school. He was a sophomore in college. Their gazes locked over eyeball and blood punch, and they spent the rest of the night dancing. When Richard decided to take a sabbatical from college, he begged Delilah, the love of his life, to come along. She was just 2 weeks from turning 18, so they waited, and on her birthday, she said goodbye to Harper and the structure-happy Gerald. She headed off to Europe with Richard. It was January, so he took her to the Alps and taught her to ski. For a year and a half, they played all over Europe. Finally, Richard's dad demanded that Richard come home and start working in the family business if he wasn't going to finish college. Richard proposed to Delilah. His parents and sister, with obvious reluctance, welcomed Delilah into the family. They had a fairy tale wedding. Delilah felt like a princess. Then they moved into his parents' guest house. From that point, all they had to do was stick to their plan. Richard would move up in the company, they'd have babies, they'd eventually get their own place, they were going to live happily ever after. Instead, Delilah was here, alone. Or not alone. She wasn't sure which was worse. Every day at 4:30 p.m., Mary left her apartment to go for her daily constitutional. Even if Mary hadn't explained this to Delilah, she sure would have known because Mary sang about it. Delilah had to get through 2 more workdays and 2 more terrifying 1:35 a.m. wake-ups before she had a day off, so she was home at 4:30 p.m. Both of those nights, Delilah had listened to pit-a-pat and rat-a-tat sounds that convinced her Ella was retreating to Mary's apartment after she tormented Delilah. Delilah was convinced that Mary had Ella, no matter what Mary said about old stains. So she decided she was going to break into Mary's apartment and look for the doll. This plan was only possible because working in a diner had some perks. You got to meet a large variety of people with a large variety of skills. One of Delilah's regulars was a private detective, Hank, and the night before, Delilah had asked him how hard it was to pick a lock. "Depends on the lock," Hank had said, adjusting the vest of one of the 3-piece suits he always wore. "Simple apartment door, lock," she said. "Deadbolt?" Delilah had shaken her head. Mary didn't use her deadbolt. She sang a lot about trust and faith. Delilah had thought the detective would ask her why she wanted to know, but instead he just asked if any of the women in the place had a hairpin, and he'd taken one from Mrs. Jeffrey, an elderly woman who came in daily for rice pudding. He'd led Delilah to the door of the restaurant's storage room, and in 5 minutes he'd taught her how to pick a lock. Good thing Nate wasn't around. He wouldn't have liked knowing how easy it was to get into the supplies. So, thanks to Hank, it took Delilah only a minute to break into Mary's apartment. Once inside, she had to take another minute to get her breathing under control. Her heart felt like it was hopping around spastically like hot oil on a flat cooktop. Her legs felt weird, as if they were trying to run away while standing still. Adrenaline, she thought. Clearly she wasn't cut out to be a spy. She was a mess, and all she'd done was get inside the door. "Well, why don't you get on with it so you can be done?" she asked herself. She didn't think this was going to take long. Ella wasn't in the living room unless she was invisible. That left the kitchen cabinets, the bedroom, and the bathroom. Delilah forced herself to move. As she suspected, Mary's kitchen cabinets were sparsely filled and neatly organized. Ella was not hiding among the stoneware or inside Mary's walk. Nor was she in the refrigerator or the freezer. The bathroom was similarly near empty. Just to be sure, Delilah checked the toilet tank. Not only was it empty of hidden items, it was unusually clean. Delilah moved on to the bedroom. There she met her first challenge. Mary's bedroom was filled with storage bins, stacks and stacks of black storage bins. They lined every wall, and a pairing of 2 each made up Mary's nightstands. Other than the storage bins, all that Mary's bedroom held was a futon and a pillow, both lying on the floor. Delilah checked her watch. She had about 40 minutes before Mary would be back. She wanted to be gone in 30 or less, to be safe. So she started opening bins. Delilah discovered a lot about Mary in the next 35 minutes. She learned that Mary was at some point a teacher, that she was a widow, that she made or had once made beaded jewelry, that she loved musicals, that she'd once come from a family with 3 kids, and that she'd once had a child of her own who had died in a fire. Delilah figured that gave Mary the right to be a little weird. Mary had a laptop, which she apparently used to watch her movies, and she had an old manual typewriter. Mary typed up her songs. They filled 7 of the 53 bins in the room. Delilah, moving so fast she was dripping with sweat after the first 11 bins, looked in every bin. Ella was not in any of them. Giving up and about to head for the door, Delilah backtracked and carefully poked the futon and the pillow. They were the only places left where Ella could be hiding. No Ella. Delilah looked around to be sure she restacked all the bins neatly. She hoped she put them in the right order. Even if she hadn't, she had to leave. Now. She'd gone well past her margin for safety. She barely made it back to her apartment in time. Right after she closed and bolted her door, she heard Mary's singing voice trilling, "Blood flowing, heart pumping, healthy, happy, zing!" Delilah leaned against her door, then slid to the floor. She was depleted and baffled. If Mary didn't have Ella, who did? And why wouldn't Ella leave her alone? On the 13th night of Delilah's sleep invasion hell, Delilah heard an actual alarm at 1:35 a.m. It was so loud that she dreamed she was being attacked by a huge bee. She was running from the bee when she opened her eyes and reached for the lamp she'd bought at a garage sale. This lamp was metal with LED bulbs. It wouldn't break. Delilah might, though. The night before, Delilah had wondered, without much expectation at all, if she'd managed to live through the 12 nights of Ella. Maybe it would just stop. Because Delilah didn't know for sure why it had started, it could just stop, right? Wrong. It wasn't stopping. In fact, now Delilah could still hear a buzzing in her ears, like a high-pitched whirring sound. Was she actually hearing that, or was something wrong with her ears? What did tinnitus sound like? She'd heard about tinnitus from one of the old men who congregated in the diner daily to grouse about the state of their bodies and the state of the world in general. He'd said his ears rang all the time. Delilah wasn't hearing a ringing. It was nothing. It had stopped. Delilah turned over and had put her face in her pillow. Why wouldn't Ella leave her alone, and where was she? If Delilah could destroy Ella, it would stop. But she couldn't destroy what she couldn't find. The day after she searched Mary's place, Delilah had started wondering whether one of her neighbors had gotten the doll out of the dumpster. She'd spent 3 hours knocking on every door in the building to ask if anyone had found Ella. Amazingly, only 8 doors had gone unanswered. Everyone she spoke to had looked genuinely clueless about finding a doll. The next day, and the next, she'd gotten to the rest of the building's inhabitants. She learned the 8th unanswered door belonged to an empty unit. At 1:45 a.m. the next morning, she'd picked a lock to the empty apartment and checked for Ella there. No doll. Delilah was beginning to have a problem that went beyond being wakened at 1:35 a.m. every night. The thing was that she wasn't just waking up every night at 1:35 a.m. She was being terrorized every night at 1:35 a.m. Every single night, some sound or smell or sensation stole into her sleep and wrestled her back into wakefulness. And now, for the first time in her life, she was having trouble sleeping at all. This problem had two prongs. First, she was having trouble getting to sleep at the start of her night. Instead of feeling the stress ooze out of her body when she hit her bed, as it always had been in the past, now when she lay down, her stress multiplied exponentially. As soon as her head touched the pillow, she had a sense of impending doom. It felt like her heart was bouncing around in her chest. She began sweating and trembling. Her throat got tight. She alternately felt frigid and then steaming hot. In spite of how fast her heart was beating, she couldn't catch her breath. On the second night of this, which was the 15th night of the entire ordeal, Delilah called Harper. "I think I'm going to die," she told her friend. "Talk to me," Harper said. "You have 2 minutes. I'm about to go on." "Oh, sorry. 1 minute 55 seconds. Talk." Delilah described what she was experiencing. "You're having a panic attack. What's been going on lately?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me, but do it in a minute." Delilah gave Harper the abbreviated version of her 1:35 a.m. torture. "Why are you making such a big deal out of it? So you're waking up at the same time every night. Just go back to sleep." "You don't understand." "Apparently not. Try again tomorrow." Harper hung up. When the stage called, that was that. Left on her own, again, Delilah looked up panic attacks on her computer. She discovered a variety of suggestions for dealing with them. Deep breathing, muscle relaxation, deliberate focus, visualization of a happy place. Delilah focused on the first two, and she managed to fall asleep, only to be awakened at 1:35 a.m. by the sound of her deadbolt being thrown back. Launching herself from her bed, she bounded through the apartment to stop her intruder. But no one was intruding. Her deadbolt was secure, and her panic returned. This brought her to the second prong of her sleep problem. Ella's nightly incursions into Delilah's sleep left Delilah feeling violated and petrified. She was literally quivering by the time whatever it was that woke her faded back into silence. She had to use the same deep breathing and muscle relaxation to get back to sleep, and they seemed to be losing effectiveness. But still Delilah tried. Lying on her back now, she counted her breaths in and out. She was up to 254 before she started feeling even a little drowsy. Somewhere around 273, she finally went back to sleep. "So you think this doll is, what, haunting you?" Harper asked. She sipped her espresso and flipped around her long high ponytail, which went well with the 50s style, full-skirted floral dress she had on today. "No, not haunted," Delilah said. "She's not a ghost. She's not possessed or whatever. She's technology. I think she's got defective programming." "And she's what, invisible? Got the keys to your deadbolt? Able to walk through walls?" Harper threw up her hands, and the multitude of bracelets around her thin wrists jangled. "I mean, there's technology and then there's magic. What you're talking about goes a little beyond technology, don't you think? Especially for an old doll." Delilah frowned and shook her head. It infuriated her that Harper was bringing up the very points that Delilah was hung up on herself. Her theory didn't make sense, but what other theory was there? "Have you looked into the meaning of the number itself?" Harper asked. She looked over at the counter and winked at a cute guy ordering a latte. Returning her attention to Delilah, she said, "Maybe your subconscious is trying to tell you something." "You mean like the 333 thing?" Harper shrugged. "Every number has a meaning, a resonance." "Uh-huh." For as long as Delilah had known Harper, she'd been a little out there. "I'm a right-brained free spirit," Harper said the first time Delilah had laughed at one of Harper's spiritual flights of fancy. "Deal with it." "I'm not kidding. Let's see." Harper pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped it a few times. "Okay, here it is. Oh, hey, this is interesting." She looked up. "I don't care," Delilah said. "I don't want to know. I don't believe in that stuff anyway." Harper shrugged. "Whatever, it's your funeral." That night, deep breathing didn't help Delilah get to sleep. After an hour of lying in her bed, exhausted but still too panicked to sleep, She sat up, grabbed her pillow and her comforter, and went out to the living room. There she curled up on her sofa, tucked the comforter under her, and was asleep in just a few deep breaths. She was asleep until something started crawling on the ceiling above her. Delilah's eyes sprang open. She clawed for her flashlight, pushed the button, and aimed it at the ceiling. Delilah fully expected to see Ella clinging to the ceiling over her head. She could even hear fingernails rasping against drywall. But nothing was there. Nothing at all. Delilah shined the flashlight all around the ceiling, and she listened. Stiffening, she pointed her light at the corner of the ceiling, where it sounded like something was scrabbling toward the wall. Delilah squinted, as if doing so would help her see through the opaque structures of her apartment. Of course, squinting didn't help, and neither did sleeping on the sofa. The sofa didn't keep Ella from tugging Delilah from sleep at 1:35 a.m. the next night either, but it did seem to help Delilah get back to sleep. It was only after the strange snicking sound retreated into the kitchen that Delilah was able to slow her breathing enough to find sleep again. The next night, though, the sofa had nothing to offer her. First, it took her just as long to get to sleep on the sofa as it had been taking in her bed. Second, the sofa couldn't soothe her after she felt a light touch on her shoulder at 1:35 a.m. This time Delilah had awakened, she didn't have to turn on a light when she woke up. She'd never turned the lights out. The fact that Delilah didn't see Ella as soon as Delilah opened her eyes gave Delilah a clue about just how advanced her nemesis was. Ella could disappear in the blink, or the opening of an eye. Delilah knew Ella had disappeared that fast, because the doll had been there. She had to have been there. Something touched Delilah. The touch had been baby soft, Ella soft. Little fingers, just a hint of a brush against Delilah's nightshirt-covered shoulder. No more than a hint of contact, but it had been enough to turn Delilah's intestines into a tangled mess of fear and transform her blood into liquid nitrogen. She felt like she was being frozen and broken apart from within. Delilah stood, clenching her comforter and her pillow. She couldn't stay out here in the living room. She looked around like a gazelle searching for a place the lion couldn't reach. Her gaze landed on the bathroom door. She ran from the little room and dove, with her comforter and pillow, into the bathtub. Curling into the tightest ball she could manage, she pulled the comforter over her head. And I think that's where we're going to leave it for part 2. I'll get part 3 out as soon as possible since you guys have been waiting, but trust me, I have too. I'm really excited to find out what happens next. Alright, see you then.